Hello, and welcome to The Way to Wow, Business Lessons from the Military. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we are here every Tuesday at 10:30 a.m. Pacific Time, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, an hour in for Mountain and Central. And our purpose for this half hour or so is to talk about military doctrine, military history, the behavior, if you will, the leadership of great military officers and non-commissioned officers, what the lessons we can learn from them that we can apply to our own businesses. So for the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about the nature of business based on the Marine Corps warfighting doctrine, which is being translated from the nature of warfare. So I feel compelled to mention this at least briefly each week. I don't look at business as war. I know there are some who do. There's a relatively well-known book that basically took the principles of the art of war and translated them into business. And I think it's called like the War of Business or something like this. Business is not war. Hopefully it's not war. I think for those who look at it that way, they are acting, shall we say, overzealously in the pursuit of their business. Having said that, much about the way military organizations work and the way wars are fought are similar and can be translated into how the business world works. And so that is our mission here each Tuesday. So let's continue on with our discussion of the nature of business. And wait a minute, I got a little problem here. There we go. Okay, so let's cancel that. And you would think after all this time I would be on top of these things, but that's okay. Okay, so here we go. And slideshow. Here we go. Play from the start. Okay, so this is see has this nice sort of military look to it, right? With the the gray background with the dark gray spots. Oops, what are we doing here? There we go. Ooh, okay, so everything we do in the Way to Wow shows is based on the three pillars of attainment. We're we're discussing concepts primarily here in the pursuits pillar, in the finances section, but as I mention each week, many of these concepts will apply to relationships, to ourself, especially our mindset and our identity. So last week, I talked about friction and uncertainty, what those two are and how they work together, if you will. And if you would like to view that episode, please go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com, I think it's /@ The Way to Wow show. And you can look at that show. And then actually 2 weeks ago, I did a session on fluidity and disorder. I had made a mistake as to where we were in the different series of issues we were talking about. But I would actually recommend, if you haven't seen the first two shows, go back, do last week's first, and then go back 2 weeks and do the second one. And that way you'll be actually learning about them in order. So this week, we're going to talk about complexity and the human dimension. And I think in many ways, these may be perhaps the most similar in terms of the nature of business between the military and the private sector, if you will. And by the way, when I say private sector, I don't mean just the private for-profit sector. I include nonprofits, academia. I think any organization, these two ideas apply, and I think you'll see why pretty quickly. So first of all, let's talk about complexity. So while ideally, when an army is seeking to achieve, let's say as an army, it's looking to achieve a strategic objective. So let's look at World War II. That's been perhaps the last war where we had a clear strategic objective, right? It was unconditional surrender by the Axis powers. So we'll talk about the war in Germany, right? So there were actually, after D-Day, June 6th, I believe it was, 1944. So eventually, fairly soon after, within a few weeks, there were several armies all focused on moving through the lowlands, Holland, etc., and into liberating France, and then on into Germany from various different directions. And the strategic goal, or the strategic objective, was to get to Berlin and or to sort of connect up with the Soviet armies that were coming from the east. Okay. And the idea was, by the time that the armies had sort of met up, Germany would have no choice but to surrender unconditionally. They wouldn't be able to, negotiate any kind of settlement, for example, for Hitler to stay in power or anything like that. Okay, so that was their strategic objective. Now, here's the thing. Ideally, every single soldier in every single unit, from rifle team to army group, would be focused on that sole objective, right? And if that were the case, perhaps it could have been met with with a lot more efficiently and quickly. The situation, though, is each, well, you had the Supreme Allied Commander, that was Dwight Eisenhower. You had his key deputies. I'm trying to remember there was oh gosh, I can't remember their names now. Anyway, there was one in charge of land forces. There was one in charge of air forces. Okay. And so at the very top, you had essentially 3 or 4 people who were overseeing sort of grand strategy. And then below him, you had army group commanders, which that included Omar Bradley. And let's see, there was another army group commander. I don't remember who that was. May have been Mark, I can't think of his last name. Okay. So then underneath Omar Bradley and his staff, you had army commanders that included Bernard Montgomery, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, who was Britain's top field commander in World War II. And you had General George Patton, who was arguably the best field commander that the Americans had in the European theater of war. Okay, and then they had their staffs, and then below the armies, you had the corps commanders, and then you had the division commanders, and then you had the regimental commanders, and the battalion commanders, and the company commanders, and then you had rifle team leaders, or you had platoon leaders and rifle team leaders. So you had this whole chain of command. In theory, each leader in that chain of command was on board with the same strategic mission. So when at the army level they planned operations, they were planning them with that mission, that objective in mind, right? And then when you get down to the tactical level, the company and platoon and below levels, they were planning their tactics in line with the strategic and operational objectives that were set by higher echelons, right? And I think in general, people believe that in the military, that's how it works, because you issue an order and people follow it. In reality, that's not really how it works. So let's start from the other direction, okay? And from the other direction, if you start with just the sort of grunt infantrymen and artillerymen and such, while they certainly want to do their jobs in most cases, what they also want to do is stay alive. And so while they may have a particular tactical objective, taking this particular hill or flanking this enemy position or something like that, they're probably going to be at least as interested in how do I meet that objective without getting killed as they are with just meeting that objective. Okay. And the amount of risk that they're willing to take will differ depending on who they are. Now, some units were willing to take big risks. So if you've ever heard about the Nisei, these were American combat units in Europe, filled by Japanese Americans. And without getting into the whole story, as many of you may know, Japanese Americans in World War II were interned in what amounted to concentration camps, although they weren't brutalized, but they were certainly taken out of their homes and put in these camps in California and other places. So some of them ended up volunteering to fight in the American military, right? Can you imagine in some way? And in fact, I have a friend of mine whose uncle, I believe, was in the Nisei. So these Japanese American soldiers were incredibly brave. I don't want to say they were reckless, because I don't think they were, but in many cases, they took risks that really just kind of blew the minds of other soldiers that would, other American soldiers that would encounter them in combat. They were much more aggressive. They, in general, I'm not saying they got this from General Patton, but in General Patton's view, you're better off just like ramming ahead and pushing it and taking it to the enemy. That's the shortest way to end the battle and meet your objective. Other commanders, other soldiers were more reticent about how they approached taking a particular objective, and they were more concerned about casualties, people, men getting killed, etc. So that, because people are individuals, they aren't necessarily attacking an objective exactly the way higher echelons are imagining it. And that brings complexity to the battlefield. Okay? And you're going to see in a minute how this plays directly, or how the human dimension, you see it plays directly into this. The human dimension has other facets to it that we're going to talk about. But indeed, the battlefield, whether it's a land-based battlefield or whether it's an ocean for navies or the skies for aircraft, they are much more complex than we think they are, right? And it doesn't have just to do with how willing a particular unit or a particular person is willing to pursue the fight. It has to do with just understanding, well, we're supposed to, do this. Well, people don't necessarily understand things in the same way. And so that can make things very complex. Now, keep in mind, I'm just talking about one side. On the other side, you have the same thing happening. So you've got two complex organizations, or at least two. You may have more than two, depending on what the factors are in the battlefield. And they have, they may have sort of what you might call complementary objectives. The Americans want to take Monte Cassino in Italy. The Italians and Germans don't want to let them. Okay, that's a direct clash in objectives, but it may not be that direct. So the enemy's objective may be different enough from the Americans' objective that they're not coming in direct conflict. It's almost like they're glancing blows, or they're trying to accomplish things that so for example, in the Battle of the Bulge, the Germans' objectives was not to stop the Americans. The German objective was to move through the American lines and create an outlet getting to the coast to separate the two armies. And the Americans' the Allies' objectives was to keep pushing toward meeting up with the Russians. So they were objectives that were opposed, but they weren't directly opposed. Okay, that adds complexity, because as if we're attacking a particular location, okay, and we're thinking, well, the enemy, what they want to do is they want to stop our attack. The enemy may not want to stop our attack. They maybe couldn't care less. Okay, so go ahead and attack. We're just going to go over here, and you're going to, in essence, kind of run right by us. And what do we care? Because we have this objective over here. Okay, so the idea is that the whole battlefield is very complex, because oftentimes we're making assumptions about we have people making decisions on our side, and on the other side we're making assumptions about what they want to accomplish, and those assumptions may or may not be correct. All of this makes the battlefield very, very difficult to operate in, and it's why it necessitates, as we were talking about, we have to be fluid in how we deal with things. Okay, there's uncertainty, right? See how these things start working together? There's disorder. Okay, so I just want to check my time here. Okay, good. So the complexity of the battlefield is the same. It's the same concept in business. Okay, so in any organization, whether it's a for-profit business, a nonprofit business, I know we don't think of nonprofits as a business per se, but a nonprofit organization. So we may have our objective, our main strategic objective, whatever that is, but our organization is made up of people, and those people may have objectives that don't necessarily align with ours, right? And we sometimes call this, corporate politics, right? So the sort of nature of people is, well, okay, the company wants to meet its objective. How many people, if meeting the objective of the strategic objective of the company entailed me not working there anymore, how many people are going to go, hey, you know what? The best way I can help you meet the objective is by, you laying me off, or by me quitting. How many people are going to do that? Very few, if any, right? Because they have their own interests as well, and that's understandable, right? So someone who might be best to leave an organization, right? They're not going to say, best thing for me to do is leave. They're going to think, okay, how can I either make myself look important, or maybe more productively, how can I figure out a way to be productive to help get toward the company's objective, even though what I've been told to do isn't really being useful at all, right? So you have those kinds of things that go on in business. So it's not that people are, more concerned about, not getting killed the way they would in a war, but they are concerned about not losing their job, right? Or they're, losing their livelihood, which is more probably directly online, right? So in general, the higher up you go in the hierarchy, the more people in business are concerned about maintaining their position, right? So that in some ways that seems the opposite of the military, where the lower down the chain of command you are, the more likely you are to face, actual existential issues like getting shot, right? But keep in mind that even in an army, the higher up you go, the more incentive there is to want to keep that position. And so if you're not fit for command, very few commanders are going to say, wow, I've reached the level where it's beyond my ability to be effective in meeting the strategic objective. So I'm gonna call my commander and say, hey, General Eisenhower, this is I don't know, Omar Bradley. Clearly, I am not qualified to be, an army group commander. You need to get rid of me or demote me. Right? It's not going to happen. And I'm not saying, by the way, that Omar Bradley wasn't qualified, but it's human nature. We're most of us are not going to demote ourselves. Okay, at least not on purpose. We may do something that highlights our own lack of usefulness, and so in the end, we sort of shoot ourselves in the foot, so to speak. But we're probably not going to volunteer to drop out. All of that creates complexity as part of the nature of business. So as clear as we can be about our objectives, and as clear as we attempt to be in not only communicating those objectives to other people in the organization, but putting in systems like compensation systems to align them with our objective, they're still individuals, and they're going to create a complexity in our company that's got to be dealt with. And then once you add in what our competitors are doing, the complexity that they're dealing with, and the assumptions that we may be making about what they're trying to achieve, so then this is why business can be very unpredictable, right? So having said that, one of the ways we try and reduce the complexity is we seek to get intelligence, right? So in the battlefield, we seek to get intelligence about what the enemy is trying to accomplish. And so, for example, when you look at the Battle of Midway in World War II, we knew that the Japanese were going to be attacking Midway before the attack began. And that made a huge difference in what the US Navy did in defending Midway, how they worked that plan. Also, the Japanese didn't know that we knew they were going to be attacking, right? So they thought they were surprising us, and we weren't surprised at all. We knew what they were going to do. And it was, other factors, of course, played into it. But in the end, this is what allowed the US Navy to prevail in the Battle of Midway. So we can reduce complexity with intelligence, which is, and we can reduce complexity by getting intelligence. Of course, we have to be careful. Sometimes we'll get intelligence that's turned out to be false, right? The other side is purposely putting out information to mislead us, right? And this is what we did in the European theater. In the Normandy invasion, General Patton didn't take part. And the reason was the Allies had built up this whole big fake army organization around General Patton, and put out information, leaked out information about it to the Germans. And the Germans were convinced that because they had gotten what they thought was intelligence about General Patton and his army attacking at the Pas de Calais, they held forces back from Normandy. So when the attack came at Normandy, among others, Hitler was so convinced that this was a fake attack, he didn't release additional resources, additional panzer divisions to help defend at Normandy, right? So that's a classic example of using essentially, fake intelligence to mislead the enemy so that, the Allies could more easily meet their strategic objective, right? So the same thing happens in business. We try and get intelligence about our competitors, right? Now, we may be able to get bona fide intelligence, but sometimes our competitors may do some things to purposely mislead us in terms of what they're doing. Now, maybe not in the same way that it happens in the battlefield. And sometimes, by the way, we may think a company is very clear in its objectives, but they're not. And they're sending out mixed signals. And so, we're thinking, what about this is really true, because they must know what they're doing. They're our competitor. Of course, they know what they're doing, right? When in reality, they may not really know what they're doing. And the intelligence we're getting is accurate, that they're confused, but because of the assumptions we have about them, we're thinking they're feeding us false intelligence or false information. So you can see how, while intelligence can reduce complexity, it can increase it back up depending on how it's being used. Okay, so again, a very important part of business is recognizing the complexity, and embedded in that then is the human dimension, and that's why. I didn't get that. I know you didn't get it, Siri. Can you hear Siri talking in the background? When you look at the history of successful businessmen or business people, you'll, especially going back, say, even 100 years ago or more, many of them were not college educated or anything like that, but they had a certain, what we might call, native intelligence that allowed them to be successful. And what it really was, I think, is they understood human nature. So they grasped the human dimension in a very profound way. And because of that, they were able to navigate the complexities of the business environment successfully. Okay, so the fact of the matter is, we and I think this is one of the areas where businesses are struggling somewhat these days, is, we look at a business and we say, look, this is what the business is about. It's about maximizing shareholder value. It's about becoming the best sneaker manufacturer in the world, or whatever that is. Okay, but within that, again, it's a business is a whole group of people. And each person brings their sense of morality. They bring their mental outlook to the business. They bring their physical stamina to the business. So as you can imagine, these things can affect an army quite significantly. So if your army is not trained to be physically resilient, it's going to be much less successful on the battlefield. So to a certain extent, the same is true in business. If our people are not physically fit for the rigors of business, so we're not going to have a resilient organization. Even more so, business today requires a lot of thinking, focus, and those are very exhausting activities. And people have different abilities to focus, to be mentally resilient. And so to the extent that we either are hiring people that are emotionally resilient and bring mental focus, or not, that will have a profound impact on our business and how successful we are in meeting our strategic objectives. Finally, people bring different moral systems. And you see this being played out in the battleground of business today, perhaps more so than, I don't know, I think any time in my lifetime, where you see groups within companies basically fighting issues based on their values as opposed to any other thing, right? So you may have seen what happened with the Walt Disney Company in Florida, right? So the Walt Disney Company came out with a particular political position. The governor and most of the legislators in Florida disagree with it, and it became a big battle. That has little to do with entertaining, producing family entertainment. Right? Presumably the Walt Disney Company is interested in producing family entertainment, or at least entertainment, kind of writ large, right? But because of the moral values of some of the people within the company, that human dimension became a factor in the Walt Disney Company, in the way the Walt Disney Company pursued its business. And in fact, it ended up leading to the CEO for Walt Disney, Bob Chapek, losing his job because he didn't lead that situation well, at least from the perspective of the board of directors, right? And you see it from the other side for Chick-fil-A, right? Chick-fil-A, they close their restaurants on Sunday because the owners of Chick-fil-A are, as I understand it, religious Christians, and they feel that people should not work on Sunday. Well, if they were open on Sundays, people would clearly come and buy more chicken sandwiches and such, right? So their morals are impacting the strategic mission for that business, which is to be profitable, presumably to make money. So, but they're saying, okay, we want to make money, but we want to make money only up to the point where we're not offending our moral values, right? Now, in a closely held or a privately owned business like Chick-fil-A, those kind of values can be expressed, and people who work for the company either go along with it or they don't. In a company like the Walt Disney Company, which is publicly traded and has, I don't know, tens of thousands of stockholders. So while some of the stockholders may agree with the moral position being taken by the group of employees that objected to what was going on in Florida, others may not. And so now this human dimension is causing a dynamic within the business that, again, it doesn't have anything to do necessarily with what we presume would be the main strategic purpose for the business, which is to be the premier entertainment company in the world. Indeed, the Walt Disney Company is the largest entertainment company in the world. Okay, so some people would look at it and say, getting involved with this Florida thing is taking away from that. And others are saying, no, we have to do this because we have a responsibility to be a good corporate citizen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that human dimension comes into play, and it creates additional complexity within the business environment. So the better we can be in understanding human nature and understanding psychology, the better we can be in building our businesses, right? So I have a longstanding friend in the real estate business. He actually, his degree from college was in psychology. He started out as a probation officer, and he found it somewhat unsatisfying being a probation officer, and he eventually got into the real estate business. And his knowledge of psychology and the way people think and behave has helped him a great deal in building he built a very successful real estate company that he later sold, and now he continues to do real estate transactions. And his understanding of human nature has been, I would argue, critical to his success. And if you look at very successful people, oftentimes what you will see is they understand how human beings think and operate. And that becomes a big part of their ability to lead, of being able to get people united behind a common vision that then, everybody can in general move toward, as opposed to having this one spinning off here and this one spinning off here, et cetera. Okay, I think I'm actually a little bit over time, but I think this is a fascinating subject, and I invite you to think about these issues as they relate to your business or to the company for which you're working. How does complexity in the human dimension play into what's going on there? We tend to sort of, it's corporate politics. Corporate politics is real. It's important, and it can be a force driving the business forward, or it can be a force that's essentially makes the company completely ineffective. Okay, how we manage human nature or the human dimension within the complex business environment will largely determine the success of the business. So thank you very much for joining me today. I want to say this morning because it's morning here on the West Coast, but I know it's already afternoon on the East Coast. So thank you very much for joining me. Next week, we're going to continue on with the nature of business. I think we've got 1 or 2 more sessions on that, and then we'll move on to the next subject. Again, I just want to mention all of our shows are available on our YouTube channel, The Way to Wow Show on YouTube. So please do check that out. I think you will find a lot there to help you, a lot of food for thought there that will help you move your business and your career forward. And the Way to Wow Show Business Lessons from the Military is here every Tuesday, 10:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 p.m. Eastern. Tomorrow, please join me for the Way to Wow, People Making Money. This is our show on career development. And we talk about a career and financial development, I should say. And we talk about various subjects for improving your career prospects, improving your finances, investments, making more money, all the issues dealing with that. That is at 12:30 p.m. Pacific, 3:30 p.m. Eastern time, again, an hour in for Central and Mountain time. So thanks again for joining me. Hopefully I will see you tomorrow. You can always go to my Eventbrite page. Just look for the Way to Wow Show on Eventbrite. You can join me live if you like, or you can always see me streaming on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. So have a great rest of the day. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow and next week. And signing off, Marie, darling, you are my belle. All the best, folks.